Hello and welcome. I'm Ellen Horseman with Camden, Arkansas, First United Methodist Church Sunday School class, where we're looking at a book by Reverend Scott Saul called Irresistible Faith, Becoming the Kind of Christian the World Can't Resist. So let me read just a short selection from scripture that has to do partly with work. This is from Paul in Philippians chapter 1, beginning with verse 3. I thank my God every time I remember you, constantly praying with joy in every one of my prayers for all of you, because of your sharing in the gospel from the first day until now. I am confident of this. The one who began a good work among you will bring it to completion by the day of Jesus Christ. The one who began a good work among you will bring it to completion by the day of Jesus Christ, says the apostle. And so let me tell you a story because I don't know why, but this made me think of it. There was a man in Glasgow, and he was a very devout Christian, very dedicated to his church. He happened to be on the train one day on his way to work when a rather zealous lady came up to him, and she'd grabbed her Bible and she was clutching it to herself, and she asked him if he was a Christian, and he said, well, yes, he was. And so she said for him, oh, dear brother, what work do you do for the Lord? And he said, well, I'm a baker. No, 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 brother, you don't understand me, she said. Ask about your trade, but what service do you do for the one who redeemed you? And he answered, I bake bread. Unsatisfied with this, she tried one more time. Brother, how are you seeking to glorify God? And he answered her, I bake bread. We're looking at chapter 8 in Saul's book of Becoming an Irresistible Christian. And he entitles this chapter Embracing Work as Mission. Embracing work as mission. And that's what this man did, this baker that I was telling you about. He was just an ordinary guy with an ordinary job, you might say, but he had an extraordinary sense of what Christianity is all about. Because Christianity is not just a church thing. Christianity is ordinary life lived out in Jesus Christ. It's baking bread or balancing books or cutting hair or lawyering or doctoring or teaching school or volunteering or cleaning house or picking up sticks in the yard. It's work and living in Jesus Christ. Friends, our daily work is an integral part of our Christian mission. That's why Saul calls his chapter Embracing Work as Our Mission. Reverend Saul says that an integral component of an irresistible faith is a Christian doing his or her daily work with a sense of joy, purpose, and mission. As a matter of fact, we human beings, we long for meaningful work. Reverend Saul shared a Gallup poll from 2015 in which the researchers polled working age adults. They were trying to find out what's the most important thing to you in life, not just in their job, but in life. And the most important thing, according to these working age adults, was to have a good job. And how did they define a good job? Well, they would like to work 30 hours a week or more. They would like to have a boss who appreciated their efforts. But the most important component of a good job, according to these workers, is that they had a job where their work makes a contribution to something that matters. The most important thing was to have a job where they made a contribution to something that matters. They wanted a job that matters. They wanted a life that matters. So our work is really important to us. Well, and in spite of that, I should say, another Gallup poll found that 87%, that's a high number now, 87% of workers who they questioned said that they found themselves disconnected from their job, or they found that I lost it here. They weren't just disconnected from their job, they were miserable in their work. Okay. So, and by the way, this disconnection from the job and this misery in work, it had no connection whatsoever with what kind of a job the people had, or how much money they made, or how successful they were in their job. It's an age-old thing for us, even when we're successful, to feel this sense of frustration, or better word, vexation. That's a word that's used in Ecclesiastes. Here's the writer of Ecclesiastes, and as Reverend Saul says, by chapter 2, we see that this man is what the world would consider successful. The writer talks about having built big houses and big gardens and parks, and yet he is dissatisfied. Here's what he says in chapter 2. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation, a vexation. Another example that Reverend Sauls gives is a modern day example, and this is a man named Marcus Person. Now, this man created the video game Minecraft, and it was so successful that he was able to sell it for $2.5 billion. And yet, was he satisfied? He would later tweet, this is Marcus Pearson now tweeting, the problem with getting everything is that you run out of reasons to keep trying. Hanging out with a bunch of friends and partying with famous people, able to do whatever I want, and I have never felt more isolated. Okay, but if our work is an integral part of our Christianity, why do we feel this disconnect and this vexation with our work? Well, Reverend Saul suggests it may be because our perspective on work lacks a redemptive and creative or biblically shaped imagination. He cites Dorothy Sayers, who says that part of this resides with the church because the church, as well as we Christians, we've allowed work and religion to become separate things. Let me read to you from a quotation he gives us from Dorothy Sayers. Here it is on page 146. She says, "In nothing has the church so lost her hold on reality as her failure to understand and respect the secular vocations. She has allowed work and religion to become separate departments, and then is astonished to find that as a result, the secular work of the world is turned to purely selfish and destructive ends, and that the greater part of the world's intelligent workers have become irreligious, or at least uninterested in religion. But is it astonishing? How can anyone remain interested in a religion that seems to have no concern with 9/10 of our life? Yeah, you know, because our workday is it's a big part of our life. It's a big part of how we identify ourselves. Are we taking the church? Are we taking our Christianity into our work? Can we find meaningful work? I mean, we need through prayer to begin to grasp that our work is central to and not peripheral to our humanity, and especially to our life in Jesus Christ. After all, if you work an average 40-hour work week, you're going to spend at least 80,000 hours of your life at work. So work is central to who we are, and work is central to our Christianity. As a matter of fact, work is central to our identity as humans. It's central to our humanity. Think about this. We were made in the image of God. We know that. God created humans in God's own image. And one of the first things Reverend Saul says that the scripture reveals about God is that God is a worker. How do we mean that? Well, what does God do? In the beginning, God created. So God is creating day, light and dark, I think, on the very first day. And God continues to create through those 6 days, each time looking at the work and saying, it is good. So if God is a worker, God is a creator, then humans were meant to work because we were created in God's image. And if we need further proof of that, what's one of the first things that God does with the human that he's created? He takes the human, he puts him in the Garden of Eden, and he gives him the land to farm and to take care of. So from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden, humans were given work to do. They were basically allowed to join God in God's creative work. And this was part of the idyllic life in the Garden of Eden, the human participation in God's act of creating and in God's act of caring for creation. So from the very beginning, we were made to work. And Reverend Saul says this, we cannot and will not fully flourish unless we become personally invested in the universal Christian job description to use our time, energy, imagination, and resources to leave God's world better than we found it. Every kind of work that creates something new or enhances something broken or something lacking is glorious because of how it intersects with God's ongoing creative mission in the world. Our work is important, whatever the work is that we do. Now, if we let society tell us what's important, then we won't see that all work is important. Our society likes to put work on hierarchies, and so-and-so's job is more important than somebody else's job. Let me read to you what Reverend Saul says about this on page 151 of his book. Let me see if I have my marker in the right place. Here it is. Now, this is Reverend Saul's talking. He said, several years ago, I met a man named Joe. We asked each other several get to know you type of questions, including, so what do you do? So Joe responded in a way that I will never forget. He said, oh, I just push a broom. What? He just pushes a broom? Who in the world told Joe? So who in the world told Joe that he should ever think or say just about pushing a broom? That he should ever think or say just about his work? What would the world be without custodians, or for that matter, caregivers, shelf stockers, repairmen and women, mothers and fathers, seamstresses, busboys, police officers, data entry staff, construction workers, mechanics, and others who, though their jobs may be lower in profile and pay, make such an important and necessary impact that the world would not be able to function without them. Jesus' chosen earthly vocation also illustrates the value and esteem due to those whose work may be in relative terms lower in prestige and pay. Many wanted to make Jesus an earthly king, yet Jesus chose to serve God and neighbor chiefly as a woodworker, a servant, a teacher, and a healer. That says something important about our absurd societal hierarchies that suggest that some jobs are important and other jobs are not. All work is important. Our work is important. Uh, and so if it is important, well, I was going to say, get myself mixed up here. Our work is important. We need to adopt the perspective of the janitor that Reverend Saul also told about. He said that when President Kennedy was visiting the NASA Space Center, he saw a man with a broom, and Kennedy stuck his hand out and said, hey, I'm Jack Kennedy. What are you doing? And the man with the broom, the janitor, said, well, Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. You see, he had a perspective, that janitor did, of how his work was contributing. So our work is important. But despite the importance of our work, we sometimes have that vexation that the writer of Ecclesiastes talked about. We can get frustrated with our work. We can begin to feel that it is hopeless or meaningless. And Reverend Sauls calls this restlessness on our part what he called the groan, G-R-O-A-N, the groan of work, that he says this groan is part of the consequence of the fall. Remember God telling Adam, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it. thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground. Yeah, sometimes our work can be frustrating. Sometimes we feel like Sisyphus in Greek mythology. I don't know if you remember that story, that Sisyphus, he had this big giant rock, and his punishment from the gods is he had to roll this huge rock up this big tall hill every day. And just when he would get to the top of the hill, bloop, the rock would fall back down and he'd have to start over again. And sometimes our jobs feel like that. But we can take heart in the example of Jesus Christ. You want to talk about somebody who could get frustrated with his work sometime. Think about Jesus in his public ministry. He taught, and he went without a place to even live. He says one time that he had no place to lay his head. He worked and he taught and he prayed, and he gave an example to his disciples, and he kept teaching them over and over again. And yet, if you look at the Gospels, especially the Gospel of Mark, you can see that, well, most of the time they just didn't get it. And Jesus would get frustrated with them sometimes. And then look where he ends up. After 3 years of pouring heart and soul and teaching and time into his disciples, where does Jesus end up with them? Well, in his hour of need, first of all, you have Judas, who sells him out and betrays him. Judas, one of the 12. And then you have the others who all run away when Jesus needs help, and Peter, who goes so far as to 3 times to vigorously deny that he's ever even heard of Jesus Christ. By every mark of this world, Jesus's work had been a failure. Certainly, it must have been a vexation for part of the time, and yet Jesus stuck to his work. And if the world resisted Jesus and his work, and Jesus's work could often be frustrating, then shouldn't we expect similar frustration? But we don't give up. Just like Jesus didn't give up. Don't give up, because your work is important. Like the Glasgow man who said that he served Christ by baking bread, we can learn to see our work as part of the unfolding of God's plan. After all, if Jesus had been on the train when that woman was asking the question, "What are you doing for God?" he could have said, "I build houses." Yes, our work is part of God's unfolding plan and God's ongoing creation and restoration, even when we can't see how God is working through us. Reverend Saul summarized a story that was written by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, Tolkien wrote this story because Tolkien had been writing and working and writing on a work he thought would never see fruition. We now know it as The Lord of the Rings. But he was so frustrated that he kind of wrote this uh, story to help remind himself that our work is important even when we can't see where it's going. So in his story, A Leaf by Nigel, he tells of an artist who was commissioned to paint a mural on the city hall. And Nigel envisioned a mural that was this beautiful, glorious tree that would be an inspiration to everyone who saw it. And he planned and he imagined and he worked, but he had all these other cares and concerns and things he had to do that kept keeping him from it, but he kept coming back to it, and he kept painting and painting. And after years, all he had to show for his time was one leaf. It's all he'd managed to paint. And he dies with just this one leaf, no tree. But as he's on a train headed for heaven, Nigel sees something beautiful, and he asks the conductor to stop, and he gets out and he looks, and there on City Hall is a beautiful mural, this beautiful, gorgeous, colorful tree, when all that he had managed to paint was this single leaf. And yet here is this tree, and right in the middle of this beautiful tree is the leaf that Nigel painted. The leaf by Nigel for everyone to see and everyone to enjoy. His leaf, along with the whole tree, was part of a glorious completed gift. So he couldn't see how he was contributing, but he contributed that one leaf. We can't always see how our work, our single leaf, will fit into God's completed work, but we can trust that the Lord God who began a good work in us will see it through to completion. My friends, I pray that this week you will embrace and enjoy your work in God's glorious name. Bye-bye.